Was the dance of the dragons inevitable, or was it avoidable? The answer to that question is that the dance of the dragons was inevitable, and that is for the following reasons. Even before the dance of the dragons, there had been a conflict of succession in House Targaryen after the death of King Aenys Targaryen, for his little brother Maegor usurped the rightful throne of his eldest son, Aegon the Uncrowned. King Aenys Targaryen had 5 children with his wife Alyssa Valerian, and these included 3 sons named Aegon, Viserys and Jaehaerys, and 2 daughters named Rhaenyra and Alysanne. The Princess Rhaenyra was King Aenys' firstborn child, and as a way of trying to grasp the Iron Throne, the Queen Dowager Visenya, Maegor's mother, suggested that Maegor and Rhaenyra should marry, to avoid any kind of confusion in the line of succession, for in Visenya's mind, her son Maegor was Aenys' rightful heir. However, there was no confusion, for by law, the Princess Rhaenyra was first before her uncle Maegor in the line of succession. In this law, an uncle or any other distant male relative could not disinherit a daughter if she was the only child of her father, so therefore Maegor could only come before Rhaenyra in the line of succession. And even then, Rhaenyra's claim came after the claims of her 3 brothers by law. But when Aenys died, Maegor and the Dowager Queen Visenya disregarded both law and custom, as Maegor was crowned as the new king by his mother, and unfortunately, Aegon the Uncrowned challenged his uncle, and was killed for it. Maegor usurping Aegon's throne was done purely out of greed, for Maegor desired to be the king after his brother, though he had a weaker claim than his nephews and nieces. Prejudice was another reason, for the Queen Dowager Visenya Targaryen thought that her grandnephews would be weak rulers like their father, King Aenys, and therefore she thought that her militaristic son, Maegor, would be better suited to sit the Iron Throne. Greed and prejudice was not limited to Maegor and his mother Visenya in the House of the Dragon, for many Targaryens thereafter would have such base desires and unfair sentiments towards their own family members. This narrative was employed in the TV adaptation in the case of the king consort, Daemon, and the prince regent, Aemond, when they too were shown to lust over a throne that rightfully belongs to someone else. And not to mention, Daemon also has an unfair opinion of his nephews because of his hatred of their maternal grandfather, Otto Hightower. Such unfair sentiments over family members, personal greed, and narcissism was bound to lead to a conflict in the House of the Dragon soon or later, and the only reason why the conflict between the Blacks and the Greens stood out was that House Targaryen was at the apex of its power, and therefore it was foolish of the Targaryens to destroy their house when no one else could. History is also a factor that cannot be ignored, as family civil wars were common in Westeros. Houses like Stark, Arryn and Lannister all had civil wars in their histories, despite all of them having a high regard of themselves due to their ancient blood and values, Andal heritage, or their gold. However, despite all of this, each of these families still had internal conflicts, and though the Targaryens think themselves different from everyone else because of their physical appearance and their dragons, their Valyrian ancestors too had civil wars, despite the fact that they too had high opinions of themselves. The monarch system of governance was also bound to lead to a conflict in the House of the Dragon. In this, having one person that must determine the fate of the lives of not just their family members, but also the lives of millions of other people, was bound to lead to a conflict soon or later. This is because only a handful of people have the right temperament to rule, and therefore it is a mistake to have someone assume the role of a leader, by right of birth or custom. This monarch might be weak, ineffective, or cruel, despite meeting all the physical and legal criteria that is necessary for them to assume power. Even House Stark, which was first presented in the books as a seemingly benevolent house, with the kind and honorable Eddard Stark as its leader, was later shown, through Brandon Stark's point of view, to have had ineffective, cruel, and evil kings in its past. The same was bound to happen with the Targaryen kings, as though the House of the Dragon produced some great kings, like Jaehaerys the Conciliator, Daeron II, and Maker I. The house also had cruel and evil kings like Maegor the Cruel, Aegon the Unworthy, and even Aegon the Conqueror committed atrocities in the name of prophecy, and for the sake of revenge. It was therefore unfortunate for House Targaryen, and Westeros as a whole, that an ineffective king like Viserys I was the king before the Dance of the Dragons, for though Viserys was a peaceful and good king, he failed to control his family, which was one of his chief responsibilities as the king of Westeros. Viserys failed to heal the growing divide in his family, and this failure led to the rise of the Blacks and the Greens in the House of the Dragon.
What would you have me do?
My son, Jacaerys, will inherit the Iron Throne after me. I propose we betroth him to your daughter, Helaena. Ally ourselves, once and for all. Let them rule together.
A most judicious proposition.
When the opportunity came for him to unify his family, and potentially avoid a conflict of succession, Viserys meekly yielded to the will of Queen Alicent, when as the king, he had all the power to force the issue with or without Alicent's approval. Bastards too would soon or later be born in the House of the Dragon, and these illegitimate children could possibly lead to conflicts in House Targaryen. Many other noble houses in Westeros have had bastards sired in their families, and though these children are innocent of their parents' lustful nature, and it is also unfair that bastards are judged to be treacherous by nature. Moreover, many bastards in the history of Westeros have composed themselves with honor and dignity, and the crimes some bastards commit are not limited to them, for many high lords and ladies have committed atrocities despite having a true-born status. When bastards do carry out evil deeds, bigots and fools will unfairly charge them on the basis of their bastardy and not their individual characters, which is unfair.
A bastard son of a traitor. What would you expect?
Are you the dumbest cunt alive?
With that said, bastards do pose a problem in the line of succession, as they can challenge their true-born siblings' right to rule, which in turn can lead to conflicts. It was only a matter of time that Targaryens too would sire bastards that would cause upheaval in the House of the Dragon, and this is exactly what happened before the Dance of the Dragons, when the then Princess Rhaenyra sired the bastards, Jacaerys, Lucerys and Joffrey, and it was for these children, and other reasons, that the Greens challenged Rhaenyra's right to rule. For Queen Alicent's true-born children stood to lose their rights to rule because of Rhaenyra's eldest sons, and moreover Queen Rhaenyra's sons by the king consort, Daemon Targaryen, Aegon the Younger and Viserys II, who were Rhaenyra's rightful heirs, and stood higher in the line of succession than their uncles, also stood to lose their inheritance if their half-bastard brothers inherited the Iron Throne. All this confusion in the line of succession, that was brought about by Rhaenyra's bastards, would be one of the causes of the Dance of the Dragons. However, Queen Rhaenyra was not the only Targaryen that sired bastards in the Targaryen dynasty, as King Aegon the Unworthy too sired bastards that would later bring discord in the House of the Dragon, ultimately leading to the Blackfyre rebellions. These rebellions would have been also called the Dance of the Dragons, if at that time the Targaryens still had grown dragons to ride with to battle, but all the large dragons had died by the time of the Blackfyre rebellions. Another reason why the Dance of the Dragons was inevitable was that at some point or other, the House of the Dragon would have too many heirs. Whereas having an heir, and a spare, can secure a house from extinction, having too many heirs can cause confusion in the line of succession, especially when there is always bound to be greedy and ambitious family members that might seek to take the throne for themselves. This is exactly what happened before the Dance of the Dragons, as there were 17 members in House Targaryen that were all potential heirs to the Iron Throne, and yet people like Sir Otto, Lord Corlys, Queen Alicent, and Prince Daemon were all intent on manipulating the confusion in the House of the Dragon to gain the upper hand in the matter of succession, and unfortunately, King Viserys decided to ignore this.
Do something.
The same problem was faced by Jaehaerys the Conciliator and Daeron the Good, as they too had many heirs that could have brought discord in the House of the Dragon, but unlike Viserys, they tried to solve this issue. Both Jaehaerys and Daeron sent members of their families to the Citadel to become maesters, and Jaehaerys in particular would also disinherit one of his heirs when she brought dishonor upon his house, which in turn helped to keep his other heirs in line. The Conciliator raised his eldest sons to depend on each other so that they could never challenge each other in the matter of succession. However, on that matter, it should be noted that it was Jaehaerys himself who brought discord in his family when he caused his son, Prince Balon, to challenge his niece, Princess Rhaenys, for her rightful position as heir to the Iron Throne, after the death of Jaehaerys' eldest son and heir, Prince Aemon. King Jaehaerys should have encouraged Balon to honor his brother's memory by acknowledging Princess Rhaenys, Prince Aemon's only child and heir, as the crown princess of Westeros. If then the Dance of the Dragons was inevitable, as such a conflict was ultimately bound to happen during the Targaryen dynasty at one time or another, then another question of whether this conflict could have been avoided in Rhaenyra's era can also be asked. Arguments for and against this question can be made. One of the causes of the Dance of the Dragons was the failure of Prince Aemon Targaryen to sire many heirs for his house. Prince Aemon was the eldest son of King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, and as such he was the Prince of Dragonstone and the Crown Prince of Westeros. He was a dutiful son that did what was expected of him, as his father the Conciliator had prepared him to rule from a young age. Prince Aemon was a dragon lord and his dragon was Caraxes. Aemon would later marry his aunt, the Lady Jocelyn Baratheon, and though it is stated in Fire and Blood that they loved each other, the couple would curiously have one child, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. It's not stated in the book why this was the case, and more importantly, it's not stated why King Jaehaerys did not pressure his son to sire more children with his wife. If Prince Aemon and Lady Jocelyn had sired more children, then the Dance of the Dragons may not have happened in Rhaenyra's era, for the lawful line of succession would have been that of Prince Aemon, and not his brother Prince Balon. Even if the Lady Aemma Arryn would still go on to die in the future, there would not have been any need for Prince Viserys to remarry, for there would have been many potential Targaryen heirs from Aemon's line. The most contentious issue that caused the Dance of the Dragons was whether Queen Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne was legitimate or not. When King Viserys named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, he at that time lacked a son of his own, and his brother, the then Prince Daemon, had proved to be untrustworthy, and therefore could not be given the responsibility of a ruling monarch. And at that time, King Viserys had the law on his side, for as his only child, Princess Rhaenyra was his lawful heir. Though the lords of Westeros bent to Viserys' will, and swore to serve Rhaenyra when the time came, the Crown Princess, Rhaenyra Targaryen, faced a challenge that with the exception of Dorne, Westeros had never had a sitting monarch that was a woman. That record in of itself was worrying, for it was impossible that all the kings that had ever ruled over any one of the 6 of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros always had sons to inherit their crowns when they died. There must have been kings that only had daughters at the time of their deaths, and yet their crowns would then pass to an uncle, a distant male cousin, or even a husband, but never the daughter herself. An example of this was given in the book Ice and Fire, where after the death of King Gerald Lannister III, his daughter, who was King Gerald's only child and lawful heir, was overlooked in favour of her Andal husband, Sir Joffrey Lyddon. Sir Joffrey took on the name Lannister and gained the title of King of the Rock, despite the fact that Andal law dictated that his wife was her father's rightful heir. So from the very start, the odds of Rhaenyra becoming the Queen of Westeros were stacked against her, for the lords of the realm were used to having a fellow man ruling over them, and therefore even though they pledged to serve Rhaenyra, they expected her father to sire a son that would one day become the king. This prejudice against women was unfair, for leadership should not be awarded to a person due to their gender, for instead of doubting the women, they should at least be trained to lead the same way men are trained, and if they then fail in the duties assigned to them, the women should then be judged on the basis of their failure, not their gender. And it turns out that King Viserys was of the same thought, as he made Rhaenyra to attend his small council meetings, so that she could learn how to govern the realm, as Targaryen princelings who had stood to inherit the Iron Throne had also been instructed by their fathers.
You will learn.
And it's true that King Viserys did not have Rhaenyra instructed in the art of swordsmanship like he did his sons and grandsons, but it's a misconception that a ruling monarch must be a swordsman, for few Targaryen princelings, in the history of their house, could have matched the swordsmanship of Maegor the Cruel, and yet despite his skill with a sword, Maegor was a failure as a king, for he lacked the actual skills to govern the realm. So what the Crown Princess Rhaenyra needed more was to learn how to govern the realm, yet despite training his daughter to rule, King Viserys was still expected to remarry so as to sire a male heir, and soon after marrying the Lady Alicent Hightower, she gave birth to their first son, Aegon Targaryen. Many of the lords of the realm then expected Viserys to name Prince Aegon as the heir.
Castle Rock is a splendid seat. Rhaenyra may take her place there by my side without shame, and feel herself well compensated for her loss in station.
What loss of station?
If you were to name young Aegon heir, Your Grace.
And when would I be doing that?
For not only did they prefer him because he was a male, but the law of Westeros was also clear, for as the true-born son of the king, Prince Aegon stood higher in the line of succession above his sister, the Princess Rhaenyra. So despite being the chosen heir, Rhaenyra's position as the crown princess of Westeros was weak, and so what should King Viserys have done to secure her inheritance, and prevent a war of succession in his family?
You must marry.
The first thing was to find the right husband for Rhaenyra to marry, and it seems that the right choice should have been her young brother, Prince Aegon.
The boy just turned 2, Otto. Yes, but it would cease the endless proposals for Rhaenyra's hand. Betroth them.
Though they had a big age gap, betrothing Rhaenyra and Aegon could have helped to prevent a war of succession for the Iron Throne. But if Rhaenyra opposed this marriage, then her father would have threatened to disinherit her like he did in the book when she had refused to marry Sir Lena Valerian.
You're not only Rhaenyra's father, you're the king. She'll do as you command.
The importance of this marriage would have been that the two factions in the House of the Dragon would have been united through marriage and blood. The children of Rhaenyra and Aegon would have not only united House Targaryen, but also the realm. This marriage would also have allowed Rhaenyra to be closer to her half-siblings so as to gain their allegiance, and thereby preventing them from challenging her claim to the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra and Aegon's marriage could also possibly have helped the crown princess to gain the allegiance of House Hightower. Having Sir Otto Hightower, and more importantly Queen Alicent, as allies could have made Rhaenyra more powerful, and her position as crown princess would then have been more secure. However, it's possible that many lords in the realm would still have expected Aegon to succeed his father as king. For though the marriage of Rhaenyra and Aegon would have united the House of the Dragon, the law of succession would still have favoured Prince Aegon, and some high lords would have used it as an excuse to fight Rhaenyra in the future. The law of succession during this time favoured Prince Aegon, for he was King Viserys' eldest son, and therefore he was the lawful heir by both laws of the Andals and the First Men. This is because of the prejudice some of the lords of Westeros had against women, as they assumed that women could not rule because of their gender. And some men wrongfully assumed that only sons could carry on the blood and family traits of their forebears, as some women in the world of ice and fire are shown to pass on their own family traits onto their children. This was shown in the main story, with most of the children of the Lady Catelyn, for they were born with her red hair, a trait Lady Catelyn got from her own mother. In Fire and Blood, the Lady Jocelyn Baratheon, the wife of Prince Aemon, passed on her black hair, that she got from her father Lord Roger, onto her own child the Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. This trait is passed on to every child born of a Baratheon, regardless whether the Baratheon is a man or a woman.
The seed is strong, I think it was.
It's also important to point out that despite Princess Rhaenys having the Baratheon black hair, she still had the blood of the dragon in her, for she would later become a dragon lord when she claimed the dragon Meleis. And Princess Rhaenys would later pass on her Targaryen blood to her own children, Sir Leno and Lady Lena, for they too became dragon lords despite being Valerians. It was unfortunate that in the TV adaptation, Princess Rhaenys was depicted as having the silver gold hair of House Targaryen, for she having the black hair of her mother's family was very important to the story. So with this evidence, it's clear that the women could pass on their family blood to their own children, but many high lords of Westeros ignored all these facts for they wanted a man to lead them. King Viserys must have been aware of this bigotry some high lords had against women, and since he could not change their minds on this matter, the only thing he could have done was to change the law of succession entirely. King Viserys should have changed the law of succession to favour not just his own eldest child, Princess Rhaenyra, but also all the eldest-born children of all the high lords of Westeros, that were girls. The importance of this would have been that Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne would have been elevated from a mere proclamation, for as Viserys' eldest child, she would then be his lawful heir. The issue of women not being able to pass on their family name to their children, especially if these women are the eldest children of their fathers, and as such they stand to be their heirs, would also have been removed by the new law of succession.
At such time when their firstborn ascends the Iron Throne, he or she will do so bearing the name Targaryen.
If a woman can carry her family traits and pass them to her own children, it makes no sense that she can't pass on her family name to her children in turn, if she is her father's heir. Due to the change in the law of succession, there would ultimately have been other women across the realm that would too have become the heirs of their fathers, and these could have added more support to Princess Rhaenyra's on claim to her father's throne. But the most important reason for this change in the law of succession would have been for King Viserys to deal with any lords that would have dared to defy his new law. It's more than likely that such lords would have rose up in rebellion against this new law of succession, and though Viserys was a peaceful king, he would have had no choice but to put down this rebellion.
I often think that in the Crucible, I may have been forged a different man.
King Viserys putting down this rebellion would have been preferable than to having his children fight each other for the Iron Throne in the future.
Better them than us.
And though there was some potential risk to his children, Viserys would have had to involve them in this rebellion. Rhaenyra would have had the support of the Vale, due to her blood ties to House Arryn. And she possibly would have had the allegiance of House Stark, due to the Starks valuing honor and duty above all. His children by Queen Alicent Hightower would also have been important, as they could possibly have deterred the Hightowers, an old town, from rebellion. For though the Hightowers would have preferred to have Aegon succeed his father as the king, it's unlikely that they would have fought Alicent's children if they had sided with their elder sister, Princess Rhaenyra, in this conflict. This is because through Queen Alicent, her children had the blood of the Hightowers, and maybe because of this, House Hightower, an old town, could have possibly been forced to support Viserys in this war. The Valyrians too would also have had no choice but to join King Viserys in his war. In this, it would have been hypocritical of Lord Corlys Velaryon to refuse to join this war in favor of Viserys and Rhaenyra, when he too had fought for the rights of his wife, Princess Rhaenys, at the Great Council of 101.
Surely, Lord Corlys, you are not proposing the Targaryen dynasty end with my daughter, simply because she's a woman.
Even Prince Daemon would have possibly fought for his brother in this war, for he had always desired for Viserys to be a more forceful king. This change in the law of succession could possibly have helped King Viserys to entice Dawn to join the rest of the Six Kingdoms, under the one rule of the Iron Throne. In this, Dawn's own laws of succession favor the eldest-born children to inherit regardless of gender, so Viserys' new law of succession might have encouraged the Dornish to bend the knee to the Iron Throne.
To trust a Martell is to be disappointed.
Whichever house across Westeros that would have then challenged King Viserys and his new law of succession would then have been put down swiftly, which would then have cemented Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne. However, all of this would have required King Viserys to be a more cunning and forceful king, which, unfortunately, he was not.
You're weak, Viserys.
Viserys failed to do what was necessary to prevent a war of succession in his family, and he instead wishfully thought that the lords of Westeros would all follow his chosen heir, the Crown Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, when members of his own small council were conspiring to not only disinherit Rhaenyra, but also kill her and her children. So instead of having his eldest children marrying each other, and changing the law of succession to favor all the eldest-born children across the realm, King Viserys chose to marry Princess Rhaenyra to Sir Rhaenyra Velaryon. This seemed to be a great decision at the time, for House Velaryon was the wealthiest house in Westeros, and it had ties to old Valyria, which made Sir Rhaenyra an ideal match for the Crown Princess, Rhaenyra Targaryen. However, the marriage proved to be a disaster, for Rhaenyra and Rhaenyra failed to sire children, and instead the Crown Princess chose to have children out of wedlock, with Sir Harwin Strong. Rhaenyra and Harwin had 3 sons, and though they would go on to be dragon lords, it was clear to everyone that could see them, that Rhaenyra's eldest sons had not been sired by Sir Rhaenyra Velaryon, for they lacked any of the classic Valyrian attributes that their mother and supposed father had.
Just look at them.
But even after Rhaenyra sired these bastards with Sir Harwin, and it was clear to everyone that they were bastards, King Viserys chose to ignore this, and he kept Rhaenyra as his heir. Viserys chose to ignore Rhaenyra's treason because he had greatly loved her mother, the late Queen Aemma. And worst of all, King Viserys chose to ignore the division that had come to his house due to Rhaenyra's bastards, and he instead chose to urge his family to coexist peacefully, and ignore the truth everyone could see.
Now make your apologies and show goodwill to one another.
Viserys' decision in this mess was ineffective, for it only fueled the Greens' hatred for Rhaenyra and her sons. Since Viserys had refused to disinherit Rhaenyra for her crime, he should have done everything possible to unify his house and protect her position as the crown princess. He should have married Prince Jacaerys to his daughter Princess Helena, and though this idea was put forward by Rhaenyra in desperation, it was still a good idea that would have united the House of the Dragon. If Prince Jacaerys and Princess Helena had children in the future, these children could have bridged the divide in the House of the Dragon. It was unfortunate that King Viserys allowed himself to be bullied by Queen Alicent into rejecting this marriage pact, for as the king, he should have insisted on the marriage of Prince Jacaerys and Princess Helena, regardless of Alicent's misgivings.
Alicent, this matter is finished. Do you understand?
Unlike the shambolic marriage ceremony of Prince Rhaenyra and Ser Lino, the marriage ceremony of Prince Jacaerys and Princess Helena would have been made into a grand affair for the purpose of showing the unity of the Targaryens and the power of House of the Dragon. And every house across the realm would have been expected to attend this ceremony, for it would also have been an opportunity for King Viserys to reaffirm Rhaenyra as his chosen heir, and to affirm Prince Jacaerys as her heir. This ceremony would also have been a great opportunity for Rhaenyra to become more acquainted with the lords of Westeros that she was hoping to rule in the future. The Conciliator did something similar during the Golden Wedding, and it greatly helped him to win many lords that were doubtful of his leadership capability. Rhaenyra could have argued that her sons were true-born dragon lords, since it was widely believed, because of the exceptionalism doctrine, that only true-born Targaryens, or true-born children sired by a Targaryen, could claim dragons. For not only had Rhaenyra's eldest sons claimed dragons, but their dragons had hatched from the dragon eggs that had been placed in their cradles when they were infants. The crown princess could have used singers, or even Mushroom, though he had a minor role in the show, to spread this information to various lords and ladies that would have traveled to King's Landing for her son's wedding ceremony. This could have convinced many lords and ladies that had doubted the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's sons, that they were true-born dragon lords. And if the so-called plain features of the three princelings had also come into question, then it would have been pointed out that some Targaryens in the past had been born without the classic Valyrian features, and yet their true-born status was never questioned, for they had turned out to be dragon lords. And they could also have argued that there had been dragon eggs that had been placed in the cradles of some Targaryens, who had had the classic Valyrian features, but these eggs had failed to hatch, and some of these Targaryens did not even bond with adult dragons neither. Rhaenyra's minions would have then pointed out that the legitimacy of such Targaryens was never questioned, and yet her sons' legitimacy was in question due to a minor technicality. And besides, they could also have claimed that the princelings got their dark hair from their paternal grandmother, the Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, who as it happens was also a dragon lord, despite having had dark-coloured hair. Of course, there was no guarantee that the marriage of Jacaerys and Helena might have prevented the dance in Rhaenyra's era, but I think it would have been worth a try, than sitting back and hoping that everything would turn out right. King Viserys allowed Princess Rhaenyra to indulge in almost everything she desired, and in the end he ended up spoiling her, for she became an arrogant brat that thought that she could do whatever she wanted. But when her actions had dire consequences, all Viserys did was remain wishful that his decrees would be followed, and he occasionally cut out the tongues of anyone who spoke ill of his strong grandsons. But it would all prove to be ineffective, for the Greens bode their time, and when Viserys died, they placed Aegon the Elder on the Iron Throne. Viserys was a good man, and he could have possibly been a great revolutionary monarch as well, if he had been more assertive and cunning, and maybe if he had those two qualities, Viserys might have prevented the dance of the dragons during his daughter's reign as queen. However, it's also possible that the dance of the dragons was destined to happen in Rhaenyra's era, and there was nothing anyone could have done to prevent that war. And this argument can be backed up with the unlucky meeting of the princes, Hemond and Lucerys at Storm's End, given their dark history, and the subsequent tragedy that happened over Shipbreaker Bay, that ultimately started the war. Neither the Greens or the Blacks wanted this to happen, but maybe it was the work of the gods, though why they could have wanted this is unknown. And unfortunately, the characters in Fire and Blood don't know the designs of their gods, so that they can try to change their fate. Or do they? One of the ancestors of House Targaryen, Daenerys the Dreamer, had a vision about the destruction of old Valyria, and she told her father, Lord Aenor, about this impending doom. Lord Aenor Targaryen would then move his entire family to Dragonstone, and this action helped his family to avoid the fate other Valyrians suffered due to the destruction of Old Valyria. But all of this was possible due to the vision of Daenerys Targaryen, and if it hadn't been for her, maybe the Targaryens too would have been destroyed in Old Valyria. In the TV adaptation, Queen Helaena too is shown to have visions of the future throughout the series, but unlike her ancestor, Daenerys the Dreamer, she mostly keeps them to herself. Making Helaena a dreamer was a change that was made for the TV show, for she was not a dreamer in Fire and Blood, and this change may not have been a good idea, for it opens up a lot of questions that may not get definitive answers in future seasons. For instance, why does Helaena keep her visions to herself when she could have possibly prevented the death of her son, and more importantly, she could have stopped the Dance of the Dragons from happening in the first place? A counter-argument to this can be that Helena's visions were too cryptic for her to fully understand, and fearing that her family too would not understand them, and that they would ridicule her for telling them about these visions, Helaena then chose to keep her visions to herself. But if this was the case, then why did she appear to Daemon in his last vision at Harrenhal, to urge him to accept Rhaenyra as his queen, for it is his destiny to do so? Why would Daemon believe that Helaena knew how his life was going to turn out, when they had never had any kind of meaningful interaction, other than their shared laugh over Aegon's incompetence as a husband?
It isn't so bad, mostly he just ignores you. Except sometimes when he's drunk.
And if her own siblings would not believe her visions, and even ridicule her for them, then why wouldn't Daemon do the same, given his hatred for the Greens? And moreover, why would Helaena help Daemon when she probably knows that it was he who sent the assassins that killed her son? Does her action mean that she supports Rhaenyra as the queen, or does it mean that she wishes to see everyone fulfill their destiny? And if that is the case, then it also opens up other questions about Helena's true character. Queen Helaena being a dreamer only complicated the plot development for the showrunners, and maybe it would have been better for them to adapt the Helaena of the book without including magic in her story. However, regardless of Helaena being a dreamer or not, it does not change the argument that maybe the Dance of the Dragons was meant to happen in Rhaenyra's era, and that there was nothing anyone could have done to prevent it.